Aloha and welcome to the screencast on form processing in Bowfolios. Bowfolios has two forms in it. One on the home page where you can update your profile, and then there's this add project form which enables you, actually there's three forms. The add project form page which allows you to add a new project, and in fact the filter page has a form on it as well. So we're going to go over that, but before we go there, I want to request that if you haven't looked at this system yet, you look at this one first, because this goes into a lot of detail about form processing, and there's a 35-minute screencast here, which will go into more details about the use of uniforms and the basic kind of information. So I know 35 minutes, that sounds like a long time, but that will enable this screencast that you're watching right now to be a lot shorter. But if you don't understand this material, then you're going to miss some. You're not going to understand some stuff. So, yeah, 35 minutes sounds like a long time, but really, forms can be very, very complicated to understand, and uniforms makes it a lot simpler once you understand the library. So it's worth the time investment. Now, I will say, okay, that to make this example simple and in order to concentrate on the uniforms package and how it works, this example exhibits a one-to-one correspondence between the structure of the form and the structure of the collection. Okay, so we have some kind of student collection, and then we have a form, and it updates that, and we read in the document, and we lay it out in the form. And that's how 90% of the simple beginner examples for form processing look. Unfortunately, that's not how life is in the real world. And so in Bowfolios, I attempted to get a little closer to the real world by having a form that has to extract data from multiple collections in order to present itself, as well as update multiple collections as a result of submitting the form. Okay, and that's more a typical scenario in real-world software development. So here we have a profile, and as you recall, we have three central collections in our system. We have a profile collection, we have a project collection, we have an interest collection, as well as these helper collections, these joint collections, profiles, projects, profiles, interests, projects, interests, which enable specification of relationships. So when we display this page, we see the interest associated with Philip Johnson, but that relationship isn't stored explicitly in the profiles collection, it's stored in the profiles interest collection. Similarly, the fact that Philip Johnson is associated with these projects, it isn't stored in the profile collection. That relationship is stored in the profiles projects collection. And just to drive home the point a little better, you can see here's the profiles interest collection, profiles projects collection. And we looked at this in the data model screencast, so you can go back there. What we want to talk about right now, though, is this this form, which is interesting because you can see that in the form we're displaying the interests associated with this profile as well as the projects associated with this profile. And then we can add projects, click update, and if all goes well, which it did, and we go here, now you can see that I have 4 projects associated with me. But remember, this information is not stored in the profile collection. It's stored in that other join collection. And so when we submit this form, we're having to update not only the profile collection, but also the profile interest collection, which stores these relationships, as well as the profile projects collection, which stores these relationships. So that's the first interesting thing. The second interesting thing is that the schema associated with the profile collection cannot be used to generate the schema associated with this form because they're different, right? The profile schema, if we go here, okay, just has email, first name, last name, bio, title, picture. Doesn't say anything about interests and projects because, in fact, that data isn't stored in this collection. So how do we do that? Okay, and the way we do that is as follows. The first thing is we've got to subscribe to all these different collections so that Mini-Mongo contains not only all the profiles, but the relationships between profiles and interests, the relationships between profiles and projects, so we can extract the correct data. Now, interestingly, we don't need kind of all the data. We could get a subset of these collections documents instead of all the documents in the collections and be quite happy. But to simplify things, I'm just using these generic publications that send all the data. All right, so we have all those things. What are we going to do? The way this form is going to be created is we're going to use the uniforms package. We're going to supply an object called model, which is going to provide the data to fill the form or provide default values for the forms. And then we're going to provide a schema which we're going to custom build in order to tell AutoForm, what are the constraints on these values and what are the values. And then we have this method that will run when we call submit. Okay, so the form layout itself is super standard semantic UI. Nothing special here. Move right along. We got a row with 3 elements. We've got a text area, a couple elements, a couple multi-select fields. Maybe the only interesting thing is that multi-select field is not a controller that appears in the default uniforms package when you download it. In fact, instead, I show you in the Meteor example form React. I show you how you can define, kind of your own controllers that are built off the uniform stuff. And so, multi-select field is actually defined within this project. But text field, all these other ones, and you can see that up here, right? So, you can see multi-select field comes from here, but all the other guys like AutoForm, text field, long text field, they all come out of the semantic UI part of the uniforms library. So anyway, laying out the form, no big deal. That should be easy peasy for you guys. The real question is what happens when. Well, okay. So there's a couple things. Is how do we display the form initially? And so one of the things that we have to do is when we're displaying this form, we need to have this multiple select field with all of the interests that are currently defined, and we need a multiple select field with all of the projects that are currently defined, of which there are 4. So how do we create that? What we're going to end up doing is when we render the page, we get the user's email, but then more importantly, we're going to collect all of the interests from the interest collection that have been subscribed to and are in our local Mini-Mongo. And then we're going to use the underscore package pluck to get a list of the interests from the name field. So that just returns an array of all of the existing interests. We're going to do the exact same thing for projects to get an array containing a list of all the project names. And now what we do is we call this make schema function, passing at these arrays of all the projects and all the interests. And it's simply going to return a new simple schema where the allowed values for our interest array and our projects array are this set of strings. Okay, so that's the way that every time we display these forms, we retrieve the most recent set of defined interests and projects and use it to populate that field. Okay, now we've got our form schema, which is going to be here. Okay. The next thing we need to do is actually create this model object with all the information about the user. So the first thing we have to do is find out, well, what are the projects associated with this user? And that's just using this guy, our join collection, to extract all of the documents associated with this user. We fetch them to get the object, and then we again call this pluck thing to get the names of all the projects that this user is currently associated with. Exact same thing to get all the interest that this user is currently associated with. Then we get this user's actual profile document, and to create the model, we're going to use this extend underscore function where we start off with a blank object, an empty object, and then we're going to extend it with the contents of the profile as well as an interest field and a projects field, which are populated with the array of interests and projects. That gives us a model with all of the information, the current profile of the user plus all of the interests and projects associated with this user, which we got out of these 2 subsidiary collections. Um, so that populates the model. We display it in this form. The user makes some alterations, then he calls this submit. Okay, data uniforms takes care of creating an object with the last value, the values of these fields at the time of calling submit, and we invoke this function, the submit, with that data object. Okay, so what does that thing have to do? Well, obviously, this thing's going to have to update the profiles collection with the new and whatever new field values. It's also going to have to update the profiles projects collection with any new relationships between this profile and projects, as well as the profiles interest collection with whatever the updated set of interests associated with this user. So there's 3 collections that need to be updated when the submit function happens, and that poses problems for insecure mode and operating upon the mini Mongo collections on the client side. And the reason for that is that if you want to be able to see errors, any errors that might occur when you invoke an operation on a local collection in mini Mongo, you have to provide a callback. And so let's say we want the case of let's try to update the profile collection. If there's an error, show the error and then don't do anything else, and then try the next update. If there's an error, show the error, otherwise, and don't do anything else, otherwise go on and do the third. So kind of a chaining scenario, right? Well, that's going to lead to invoking the first mini Mongo operation, creating a callback. If there's no error, then we invoke the second one with another callback that's nested within the first callback, and then the third, again and again and again. Big pain, okay? So this is where we can use and in fact, that requirement to use callbacks is just imposed by Meteor. This is the way that Meteor wants things to be done in the case that you are working on the client-side database and trying to update it in insecure mode. The other operation that Meteor provides, which is actually the technique that you'll use in practice when you want to go to production, is to use their remote procedure call mechanism called Meteor Methods. And here's an example right here. And the idea is that we're going to get this name of a Meteor method, and it's that string that names it is going to be imported from this methods file right here. So this string identifies a specific method. We're going to call it with some data, an object that's data, and then we just have a single callback. Okay, this method is going to invoke all of the different, do all the different updates for all the different classes, all the different collections. If any of them fail, it's going to throw an error. That error will stop processing on the server side and then return as an error object that will be displayed to the user. Okay, so we have no nested callbacks, even though we're invoking multiple operations on the database. And since we're invoking these operations on the server side, we can do things like check to make sure the user is authorized to make that update, which we can't do on the client side. And also, we can actually use some Mongo capabilities that aren't available to us on the client side. So it's like a super win-win, at the expense of having to understand this Meteor method thing, which turns out to be not very expensive because the thing is really, really simple. Okay, so here's an example. We're going to call this remote procedure called update profile method. We're going to pass it the data, which turns out to be the model object that was built from this. And let's go see what that is. Okay, so if we go to methods.js, we see that the update profile method, here's the string right here. It's equivalent to this. For reasons I quite don't understand, I couldn't just put this variable name in here and have it result to the string. I had to copy the string and make sure it was copied correctly to make this thing work right. But anyway, so you can see this is what's exported. Update profile method. This is what's exported to the client so that they can invoke the Meteor method with this name, and here is the Meteor method with that name. And what you can see, so you got this Meteor method, you got and inside you pass it an object, and that object starts with this crazy kind of string which is basically the name of the remote procedure call, and then you have a argument list, which should be a parenthesized object, and I just do the string deconstruction so that I automatically assign the interesting fields in this object to variables which I can reference within the body. And then here's the body right here, and we have to terminate with a comma, but don't worry about that. That's just a JavaScript syntax thing. What we've really done is we've just basically here defined a function which is going to be run on the server side. It can do nice things not available on the client, like use a object as a selector. That turns out to be no-go on the client side. And if any of these things run sequentially, so they're not asynchronous, and if any of them have an error, they'll throw an exception which will be caught by the method mechanism and then returned to the client for display. Okay, so it's super great, because now what we can do is we can say, hey, when we want to update the profile, well, the first thing we want to do is update the actual profile collection. We want to find the user whose email is this, and remember, email is unique, it's a primary key, so this will just find one record. And then we're going to set all these fields. We don't know if they've been updated or not, so we're just going to set them all, okay, to whatever value is returned, whatever the value was in the document. The next thing we need to do is update our profiles, interests, and profiles, projects collections. And in order to make sure we don't leave some old data around, the first thing we're going to do is remove all of the documents matching this particular user's email, so that we can then map over the set of interests that were passed in and just do an insert. So we're kind of getting rid of whatever was there and then reinserting the up-to-date set of relationships between this profile and interest and this profiles and projects. So there you go. It's only 5 lines of code. We've updated both collections. Easy peasy. You can read more about Meteor methods in the Meteor documentation. Here's the link right here. It's very straightforward and provides some nice benefits. Similarly, when we want to create a new project, we're going to have some fields that are associated with the project, but then also, we want to specify the interest for this project and whoever might be interested in being in it. These two fields require updating our join collections, the project interest collection and the profiles projects collections. And so it's basically the exact same situation as before. We've got this add project page. We're going to create a schema by first getting all of the interests in all of the profiles, so that the pull-down menu has all of them. When the data is completed, we're going to call this add project method Meteor method, which is located over here. And here's the projects. And so the project add consists of adding a new project definition. This will throw an error if you try to define a new project with the same name as an existing project, because in the schema for projects, we have declared this name field to be indexed and to be unique. So whoops, wait, we gotta go here instead. So things might stop right here and return an error without doing any of this other stuff if in fact you haven't supplied a unique name for the project. But if everything goes well and this insert returns correctly, then we'll go ahead and remove any existing relationships between this guy, this name, and this project, which theoretically shouldn't be there, and then go ahead and do an insertion. So in fact, I think these lines of codes are superfluous. They're not going to hurt anything, but I don't think we need to do them, because by definition there shouldn't be any projects in there with that name. Okay, so that's the use of Meteor methods. Really, really helpful. And hopefully this will enable you, or this is actually form processing, sorry. And yet, I guess we've covered Meteor methods at the same time, because it's an intrinsic part of the process. So the takeaways from this, you define your auto form using uniforms. You build a schema using a function in this case, so that you can declare some of the fields in the schema by reference to the value of mini-mongo, and then we use a Meteor method in order to update multiple collections at once.